You nasty field hand beating piece of shit. So after his wife is executed, now he is being accused. He has to go through this whole trial process. But he's a real smart cookie, and it's mostly because he's got all this money. The whole thing, though, was that if you were accused of being a witch, right, and you had gone to trial and you were found guilty, your land would not go to your children. It wouldn't go to your spouse.
Right, because you gained it through essentially as illicit activity.
It would go to the government, and they would be able to do what they wanted with it. And what Sheriff Corwin was doing, he was taking this little loophole, and he was seizing the opportunity to steal these dead people's land. Let's save our asses. Let's make sure that we don't, make sure we don't get roped up into it. Yeah. But Giles Corey, now that he's accused of witchcraft, all of a sudden is like, oh, well, these witch trials are bullshit. Now they've accused me of being a witch, and these witch trials are bullshit. They're not even factual. Where did they get their sources? So, Sheriff Corwin, he's taken all of this for himself. He's basically profiting off of it. And Giles Corey knows what's going on. He, first off, does not plead guilty or innocent. The second thing that he does is he wills all of his assets, so his money and his property, to his sons-in-law, so that should anything happen to him, it will absolutely not go to Sheriff Corwin or the government.
Wait, so I thought that it immediately reverted to the sheriff and or the government.
It would become up for grabs. It would become basically part of the government.
Right, no matter who you willed it to.
And then Sheriff Corwin would find a way to finagle in there and take it for himself. When Giles Corey signed everything over to his sons-in-law, and I don't know if willing it is the right word, but it no longer became his property. Does that make sense?
Oh, so he transferred title.
So he had deeded it over to the two of them because he knew the predicament he was in, and he also knew that this could be a driving factor in his execution. Because he refuses to plead innocent or guilty, he doesn't enter a plea. That, by the way, at the time is called standing mule. That was the name for that tactic.
Right, because it's stubborn.
It was a widely used tactic to hold a trial from moving forward. There was actually, though, an English law that dictated what to do in that situation, and it has a French name that I honestly and truthfully could not pronounce, where when somebody does the whole standing mule thing, in order to get them to plead guilty or innocent, it's mandatory that you torture them to get them to plead one way or the other. So, because of this, the tactic and the method of choice is that Giles Corey will be stripped naked, brought to town, where everybody can see him.
And pressed.
A board will be placed over his chest, and heavy stones will be placed on him, and the weight will increase, and he will be pressed until he is willing to plead guilty or innocent. That is exactly what they do. They bring him out there, they start pressing him, and it goes on actually for a few days. A lot of people actually believe that this was a turning point. And it's not a secret, but I'll spoil it for you. He dies because of this. Because he keeps telling them to put, quote, more weight.
I was going to ask if that was
an
actual
quote. Well, it's supposedly. I don't know that that's what he actually said.
I know, you weren't there, but
But that's what he's famous for, and that's how people know him, is he's the guy that said more weight. Okay, so now that I've gone through most of the history of this, we're going to start getting into why this is part of my paranormal topic. It's beyond coincidental. Things get a little bit too weird for it to just be chance. So, when Giles Corey is being pressed to death, there comes a point where he has so much weight from all of these stones on his body that his tongue is literally protruding from his mouth, and his face obviously is starting to turn colors.
Right. I read that.
And Sheriff Corwin walks up to his body and uses his cane to take his tongue, and he presses it forcefully back into his mouth.
Oh, see, what I had heard was that he had taken it and pressed it forcefully upon the ground.
No, he presses it back into his mouth.
Right, well, that makes well more sense.
But when that happens, it's sad that what Giles Corey says to Sheriff Corwin is, Sheriff Corwin, I curse you, and I curse all of Salem. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. Let me get to my notes about this, because this actually involves an excerpt from a book. 4 years after Giles Corey's death, Sheriff Corwin died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 30. Local legend suggests that Corey not only cursed Sheriff Corwin,
but all sheriffs.
But that's right, every sheriff since the year 1692. Yes, and that is why I was so excited to talk about this, because I feel like it's such a weird coincidence, and it's such a huge part of the history, and I love that it was taken so seriously until,
but it really
honestly,
was,
nowadays.
Some people retired, right?
Well, we're going to get into that. There were periods of time where Salem did not have a sheriff because nobody wanted to take the job.
Right.
Think about the fact that people would not take that job because they didn't want to die.
Right.
Let's talk about the 1970s. A lot closer to modern day. There's this book, okay? It's called Cursed in New England, and I'm going to read you an excerpt from it. So the book says, after 300 years, in 1978, Robert Cahill, while in office, suffered a rare blood disease, a heart attack and a stroke. Doctors could not find the cause of his afflictions. He was forced to retire as sheriff of Essex County and as master and keeper of the jail. Today he lives in Florida. Mr. Cahill notes that the sheriff before him also contracted a serious blood ailment while in office. It forced him to retire. He in turn had inherited the post from his father after the elder man died of a heart attack.
Right.
While serving as sheriff. The previous sheriff before him had suffered heart problems as well. So have all the others as far back as I could trace, he says. And the two men that have followed me have had an awful lot of legal trouble as well.
Right.
I'm guessing because of how excited you got that you maybe already knew that part about his curse. About the sheriff.
Yep.
Am I right?
Yep.
But, and this is the part that makes me never really, want to fuck with him, and actually, I'm gonna be honest, there is an entire street that Kenny and we don't like to walk down past a certain part of night, because I am very superstitious. It's fine if you're not. But there's nothing wrong with being superstitious, because guess what? If you are right about something, isn't it better to just avoid it and be safe? Giles Corey has something very in common with the Banshee. If you see the Banshee, you're gonna die. Whenever Giles Corey's spirit is spotted in the graveyard, which, by the way...
Only in the graveyard?
I can find the name of his spirit in general, but it only comes up in, one general area. Locals believe that Corey's ghost still haunts the area around the Howard Street Cemetery, as it is now known, and that his ghost is often seen before and after terrible events happen in the town. So that's the quote, but that's actually also something that I heard both times from multiple different tour guides when I was there.
But I also wasn't on a guided tour.
It's a real big superstitious thing. There is a church that's built on the plot where he was crushed to death, and that street there, that cemetery, that's where they spot him. And one of the most notable things that happened was he was in that cemetery before the Great Fire of Salem in 1914, right before it broke out. Ghost hunters...
Like an omen.
Well, also ghost hunters that are in the area that say that they see something that looks remotely similar to him have had things happen to them from heart attacks to blood diseases to car accidents. The second time that we were there, the tour guide that we went with, one of the things that he talked about during the tour was the personal experiences that he had had with other people in his research group, and he had talked about how somebody who he had worked with in that area had seen something that was reported to be very similar to the ghost of Giles Corey. And that person had gone back home to a completely different state immediately after seeing what he said was the ghost of Giles Corey, and he had gotten into a terrible car accident. And obviously that could happen to anybody, but it's just...
coincidental.
Well,
like,
also...
too coincidental.
It just seems like a lot of bad luck. And I feel like it's worth maybe everybody that's interested in it and thinks that it's a little fishy, go into it. Research it, look it up, see who maybe believes that seeing the ghost of Giles Corey is not a great thing. But I also want you to go into the fact that, you know, all of these sheriffs and people that had held that position had died in a really awful way that had to do with their hearts. By the way, that curse, they said that that curse had died after they moved the precinct from Salem to a different location. Once they had moved it in 1991, they said that they believed that they had broken the curse.
When I was there, they had said that it had stopped because the person had retired.
So Sheriff Cahill and others believe that when the sheriff's office was moved from Salem to the new prison in Middleton in 1991, it broke the curse and spared the future sheriffs. Since the move, no sheriffs have been diagnosed with any heart conditions or blood ailments. That's the whole thing about it, though, is that, and I know that it sounds like maybe really petty, and everybody can take it for what it is, but when you're on that street and you're standing literally feet away from the place where Giles Corey was pressed to death, it's really hard to explain. You just get a really bad vibe from it. There were honestly times when Kenny and I were on this tour and we were walking around and we had gotten to that spot. I honestly started panicking because we had gotten to that story and I knew ahead of time that that's what we were going to go talk about. But that was really the first time that we had gotten into such detail with a tour guide that had been part of a research group and had had personal experience with it. And we had walked across the street to a different location, and he started talking about the witch dungeon, which literally is right across the street from it, right? And we're across the street, and I swear, it's like, I don't know, maybe it's nerves, because it could always be nerves. Your nerves do all kinds of crazy things to your body, but my chest got very tight. I got very scared. I wanted to go back to the hotel. You paid money to be on a tour, just finish the tour.
Being someone, I don't have heart problems, but I have severe panic attacks, especially in particular areas.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's really important. It's not something that I wanted to feel. It's not something that
no one wants to feel panicky or sick.
It's not something that I was crazy about either, but, you know, we were on this tour, and I was having a good time. And I was really enjoying it, and it was super fascinating to me. But, I mean, honestly, it had gotten to a point, and I did start to feel really sick.
But it wasn't because you had already known about the supposed curse.
Well, here's the whole thing, though, is that I did know about the fact that he had died there, and I had heard a little bit about it.
Right.
But I was fine with it. I had walked past it a whole bunch of times, and I was fine with it.
You hadn't felt anything before you were on the tour.
It's nighttime, we're across the street, and now I've got this tour guide telling me about his very personal close friend. The human mind is super powerful, it does all kinds of things to the body. Maybe it's like a fear reaction, but I also have to note, I'm not a person that gets scared a whole lot.
Right.
And I wasn't scared when he was telling us about this. I was just listening to him tell us about his friend, and my chest just... truthfully, it started hurting really bad. It's just weird timing. I'm not trying to tell anybody that it's one thing or the other, but take it for face value. And, you know, also believe me when I say I'm not somebody that reacts.
No, and I agree with that as well.
And I'm not somebody that wants to exaggerate it.
But there's different sensitivities for different people.
Anybody who has experienced something like that before can admit it's not something that you plan, and it's not something that you expect. It's something that happens.
Right, but also that lends a lot of credibility to a particular place.
Places have personalities and they have feelings that come with them.
Right, but then there's a skepticism that